Hey, welcome back to the 5-Star Life Show. I'm Coach Seth. I'm here with my co-host, Coach Mia. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We've got another great show, so if you just tuned in, be sure to go back and watch. This is like part 2 of a 4-part series. And, we're diving into something that's so powerful for parents and educators, obviously for students as well. But we're talking about, the tipping point that kids are in. If they're adolescent, they're at a tipping point. They're being shaped. Who are they going to be? What kind of character will they have? We talk about integrity, who you are when nobody's looking, like truly who are they is being shaped. They're at a tipping point. And one of the things we talked about in the previous session that we're going to continue to build upon is ultimately they will be shaped in one of two ways by one of two methods. They will be shaped and developed as people, their character, by inside forces like their inner voice, their conscience, or they'll be shaped by outside forces, okay? So in our last one, we talked about anthropologists. They study cultures, and there are cultures that believe that individual conscience from within should guide individual behavior, and that you have a decision to make, and you seek inside to say, how should I treat this person? Am I going to be a person of integrity? Am I going to lie? What am I going to do? And your own guilt or your own honor should guide you in the process. It's called a guilt culture. And then the other opposite of the spectrum, there are societies that are called shame cultures. So instead of seeking, your inner voice, your conscience, you're looking to outside forces to tell you how you should think, how you should act, how you should behave. And ultimately, this is such a dangerous and fine line. Now, don't get me wrong, like it's so important for kids to listen to positive outside voices from parents and teachers. Like that helps inform their inner voice, right? That's not what I'm talking about. Here's an example. So many of you have heard me talk about basketball. I love basketball. And our family used to run a basketball tournament company. So in high school, I grew up refereeing at basketball tournaments, which, one of the things that triggers me, Mia asked me what triggers me in a previous episode. I was like, not much. Like the next night I was at a basketball game and I got so triggered by a bad call. So referees trigger me.
Okay.
So, but I was once one, so I can be triggered at referees. I'm refereeing a game, and it happens to be 2 teams. One happens to be all white. The other team is all black. And I'm half white and half black, so I'm refereeing the game, just making the right calls that I see. And there's one guy on, the team that every time I call a foul on him, he's like, I didn't foul. What are you talking about? One of those guys, which that's every basketball player who's ever played the game. And at the end of the game, this guy comes up to me, happened to be black. He comes up to me, he's like, what is wrong with you? You are horrible. Like, you ruined the game. Like, you are prejudiced and racist against your own kind. Now, I was like 17 years old or so. And I mean, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, in our society today, everything is prejudice, everything is racist, and we make everything up a race. It's like everything. Well, back in the day, it wasn't quite like that. So when this guy said this, I was like, I felt the pain of that. I felt bad. I was like, so what I did is because I developed my inner voice as a kid, I had a family and I was a part of a community that taught you to tune into your inner voice. So I did some self-reflection. I was like, okay, did I prejudge who I went into the game? No. Am I a racist against white people or black people or yellow people? No. So did I make a wrong call? From what I saw, I made the right calls. So everybody has a different angle, so maybe I missed it, but I didn't do anything intentionally. So am I feeling bad because of guilt coming from within that I did something wrong to harm the person? No. Then why do I feel so awful? See, I felt awful because someone from outside of me was actually heaping shame on me. And I was being shamed into trying to make calls in his favor. And what was happening is, and this is such an interesting distinction that it's so important to teach kids this distinction, okay? So when your guilty conscience flares up, that's a really positive thing. Like, we should celebrate when we feel guilty. Now, I know that sounds weird because you feel bad, but we need to teach kids to celebrate. Like, okay, you feel guilt? That is your body's brilliant way of raising alert, raising the flag, sounding the alarm. You are up here. This is who you are. But the decision you just made is way down here. Like, what are you doing? Wake up, hello, this is bad. The whole point of guilt is our own alarm system saying, make a corrective behavior. You're better than this. Now, shame is oppressive. Guilt is corrective, right? Guilt is meant to be corrective to help us win. Shame is oppressive. Shame is simply a blanket that covers us, wraps around us, smothers us, and never lifts. Guilt is meant to correct us, and we move on. It just brushes off our shoulders. We move on with life. And what you see happening in society, and what you've got to teach your kids, is that when outside voices, when you seek your conscience and you know you're doing the right things, but outside voices are throwing the blanket of shame, they're trying to manipulate you into something that goes against who you are. And that is a dangerous place to live, because you end up living your life trying to please everybody else when deep inside you don't want to face yourself in the mirror because it does not jive with what you have inside.
I think that's so interesting because I think we're brought up, and I think those two they kind of are interchangeable. And if you can't identify, how to accept the guilt and move on, like with you broke the toy, you confessed, and you moved on. But what do you do when, let's just say maybe your parent was like, oh my gosh, Seth, you're terrible that you didn't tell us right away. So now you've got your guilt, and you thought you were going to be freed of it. Now you've got shame. Is that correct?
Yeah, and this is why we're talking about this, because as a parent, we love our kids so much, and we want them to make right decisions. But instead of leading them back to their conscience, to their inner voice, we heap shame on them. Like, I do it. I don't want to do it. But what it is, it's parenting out of fear. We're afraid that we saw them do something that, like, what are you thinking? And instead of letting them trust their inner voice that's saying, what do you think? Because they're doing the same thing. We heap shame on them, and then they get confused between, I feel guilty, I feel ashamed, this is bad, and then they don't know the difference, and then they go into rebellion.
Do you also think as a parent, we jump in before we even allow them to process their inner voice?
It is so hard because when they're little, you have to train them and help them develop a conscience, right? You're teaching them right from wrong. Now, we have an intrinsic level of that, but there's certain things that you're like, no, you can't, that's no good. And so they have that by the time they hit adolescence, even, man, by the time they're 4 or 5 years old, they really have developed this inner voice, and they know. I mean, they really know. And when we, as parents, it's the fine line of knowing when to jump in, when not to jump in, and it's almost a control mechanism for us that we've got to let go of and say, how can I teach them to tune into that inner voice? The more we can teach them to tune into that inner voice and ask questions like, well, how do you feel right now? You just caught them doing something. I mean, maybe just the question like, what happened? What, how do you feel about this? And immediately they know. This ties into sports too. I had a coach who was a screamer, and it brought out the worst in me. I had to learn how to ignore his voice and to shut out his voice. And I was like, dude, I know when I make a mistake. I know it. I'm not trying to turn the ball over. I'm not trying to miss a shot. And as soon as I do it, I knew it. But he would never give me a chance to correct it. He assumed he needed to tell me everything to do.
And point it out.
And that's what we as parents do. And what does it do? It just pushes our kids away. Instead of pulling them in and saying, how do you feel? Not good. What happened? I don't know. Half the time they're not thinking.
Right.
They're teenagers, or they're pre-adolescents. They're not thinking, they're spontaneous, right? You got the prefrontal cortex that is, sporadically latching onto different thoughts and different things. And they're still learning how to control impulses. And so giving them the freedom to mess up and take corrective action takes a lot of self-control as a parent and as an educator. But it's a powerful thing, and it's so worth it.
It is.
All right.
It's good stuff.
We're out of time. We're going to follow up and do another segment that kind of builds on this. If you enjoy this, be sure to like this video. Be sure to share it with a friend. And if you thought this was helpful, I want to encourage you to go to our website and make sure you subscribe to make sure you're on our email list, because we have so many programs, curriculums that we teach this to kids either through video or at our 300-acre training camp called Summit. We're out of time. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks.